will talk a little bit about parent-child interactions and relationships in the context of mealtime. And so the focus of much of the research that I'll talk about is with autistic children, but the importance of responsive interactions during mealtime is relevant to all children. Mealtimes are often a really special time for parents and children to check in with each other and connect. And even at birth, feeding accounts for a large portion of how infants and parents are interacting. Next slide. So just a little bit of background on why mealtimes and eating are important to focus on in autism. Challenging eating behaviors in autism are highly prevalent. Depending upon the article, it could be up to 83% of children with autism have some of these challenging eating behaviors. There's also a greater risk for obesity in autistic children, and there is an overlap between anorexia nervosa and autism as well. So I think some studies suggest that like about 22 to 26% of those with anorexia also have an autism diagnosis. And many of these challenging eating behaviors persist into adulthood. And it's difficult to think about different treatment options because we know that there are many factors that are likely underlying these. But today we will focus on just kind of one of the potential factors, and that's the importance of the parent-child mealtime interactions. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off by talking from the parent's point of view with mealtimes and when thinking about these challenging behaviors. And so this was one family that we worked with, and she said to us, "We are concerned he is too skinny, like we're worried about his health. I mean, every day I open the fridge and I am thinking, what am I going to feed this kid today? That is the hardest part. It's stressful on top of everything else." And it's well known in the literature that these challenging eating behaviors are highly stressful for parents. And I think it's especially so because eating is a basic need. And as parents, we want to meet our child's basic needs. So I really want to make sure that we better support parents during these meal times. Next slide, please. And so to support parents during these meal times, we know that parent-child interactions are a key component of responsive feeding interactions during meal times, which can be helpful for increasing a child's food acceptance. Next slide, please. So related to in autism and feeding, we know that mealtime is super stressful for families. We also know that parents often make numerous mealtime accommodations for their child or make food choices to prevent triggering a challenging behavior within their child. But within other research related to pediatric weight-related conditions, we also know that when parents are stressed about the child's weight status, parents sometimes use more forceful or coercive types of prompts. And this is extremely well-intentioned, but it is often counterproductive. And I mean, I will admit I have been guilty of this as well with when my child got sick. I really wanted them to just take another bite. So I think we're all this happens to everyone, but it is often counterproductive to what our goal is to get them to take just one more bite. But interestingly, their research has shown that when children show greater food acceptance, parents in turn show more responsive parenting. And when parents show more responsive parenting strategies, then children show more food acceptance. And so there's this bi-directional interaction between the parent and child and back and forth during meal times. And that's what I'm really interested in. Next slide, please. And so one way to quantify some of these bidirectional interactions is through this really big word, interpersonal physiological synchrony, or some are calling it physiological linkage now. But it's really this dynamic co-regulation of these really micro-level behaviors in physiology between the parent and the child. So if a parent's physiology is going up, we often see the child's physiology going up as well, and that's considered a synchronous moment. I also like to think of it as times in which we say oh, we were so in sync, or we were on the same page. It's kind of some of those moments. But it's a process that I believe it starts in utero, and it's known to positively influence child self-regulation and cognitive development. Strong parent-child relationships and parental sensitivity are linked to greater physiological synchrony and can actually act as a modulator to a child's response to stress. But if synchrony is low, it can also spread parent stress to the child. And so in instances of parent anxiety and stress, which is very common in mealtime, sometimes parents tend to use strategies that begin to override the child's cues. But there are some really interesting examples of synchrony, even in other literature. So there are studies suggesting that in couples, when there's greater synchrony, there are higher ratings of marital satisfaction. There's also studies with an orchestra and a conductor, and when they're at rest, they're asynchronous, but as soon as they're playing together, their physiology is actually in sync. So it's kind of this really interesting phenomenon. Next slide, please. So when thinking about the literature on synchrony and feeding, there was a study in preterm infants, and what they found was that when there was more mealtime behavioral conflict between the parent and child or more asynchrony, this was associated with maternal concern about the child's medical vulnerability. So kind of that stress and anxiety related to the child's health and well-being. As well as in early infancy, behavioral synchrony was in turn related to a child's willingness to eat. Next slide, please. So within synchrony and autism, it's mixed right now and there's not a ton, but some research suggests that children with autism may show less synchrony with their parents. And emerging research also suggests that parents may use more compensatory strategies during their interactions with their child. And so our study and what we're really wanting to do is to begin dynamically quantifying these interactions with physiological data to better kind of understand some of these individual nuances of these eating behaviors. Next slide, please. So this is really, really preliminary data, but I thought I would at least show you something and kind of what the data looks like and what the process that we're going through looks like. So this is only like a small subset of the full data set, but I'm hoping this will kind of help you see what's to come. But this data is on 10-minute video observations of mealtime. And so parents provided the child with a preferred food, and then after about 5 minutes, they presented a non-preferred food. We recorded these all with GoPro cameras. One parent and one child wore our sensors, and we captured electrodermal activity. Our sensors just are kind of like an Apple Watch that measures this. Next slide, please. So the subsample that I'll show you today is 8 autistic children. They were all 3 to 9 years of age. There were 4 in the autistic group and then 4 in the non-autistic group. We recruited picky eaters for the autistic group and non-picky eaters for the non-autistic group. This was not a diverse sample, but hopefully our full sample will be more diverse. Next slide, please. So these are just average correlations or trying to show the relationship between the parent's physiological data and the child's physiological data over the 10-minute observation. And within the autism group, on average, they're showing no relationship between their physiology during the mealtime. And in the non-autistic group, there's like a weak positive relationship across the 10-minute observations. But I will say this is across the whole 10 minutes, and there's a lot that can happen and a lot of ups and downs that can happen within that 10 minutes. So that's kind of our next step with looking at the data. Next slide, please. So this is our next step with kind of visually examining that whole 10-minute observation. And what we see here is kind of in one, there's just a lot of variability and there's kind of a low correlation or no relationship between their physiology. But in the third parent-child dyad, it's a pretty positive correlation. They're pretty in sync with their physiology. And then in the fourth one, they kind of start off in sync, but then we see that the parent is in blue and the child is in red. And we see that the child is going down, but the parent's physiology is going up. So they become a little bit more asynchronous. And then why you visually inspect your data too is if we look at number 2, the child's physiology looks really low. And when I went back to the video, the child is taking on and off the watch a lot. So that's probably what's happening there. So that's why we always look and visually inspect the data. Next slide, please. So this is the next step, which these are called wavelet coherence plots, and these are really confusing. And I am honestly learning these as well. But what you need to know is the outline portion are portions where we see a significant synchrony. And what these plots tell us is the magnitude of that synchrony, which is kind of the dark red portions. They also tell us the direction of synchrony, whether it was they were in sync or they were asynchronous. And it also tells us if the child or the parent was leading that synchronous or asynchronous moment. So we'll specifically look at one of these on the next slide. So when we look at this, this is that outlined area of a significant synchronous moment. Since the arrows are pointing right, it means that it's a positive synchronous moment. Up and to the right means that it's child-led, and then it just kind of goes flat, so it's neutral. And then when it goes to the right and down, it means it's parent-led. And when I go back to the video on this one, what's happening is the parent and child are they're eating and they're just talking about their day. And this is often a strategy that we tell parents is to not talk about the food and just make it a really positive interaction during the mealtime. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a significant asynchronous moment. The arrow is pointing to the left. And when it's up and to the left, it means that it's mostly adult-led. And when I go back to the video here, we see that it's interesting. The mom's physiology is actually her arousal is increasing and the child's is staying pretty steady. And she's getting ready to prompt her child to take another bite. So thinking about how that just preparing for the stress of trying to get your child to just take one more bite of food. And so overall, I think this is an interesting way to begin understanding some of those nuances to these parent-child interactions, and perhaps a better way to begin developing personalized interventions by looking at these individual plots, individual parent-child interactions, and seeing which strategies are supporting synchrony that are in turn supporting the child's food acceptance as well. Many of the interventions that we do are parent-mediated interventions and parent-led interventions. And so this may also be a way for us to easily kind of understand their treatment response or how their relationship or their interaction with their child is changing across the course of an intervention. Next slide, please. I just, of course, want to always acknowledge my mentorship team, statistician, the funding that supported this work, and of course, all of the families and children who trusted to tell me about their child's eating and trusted me to try to help them find a better answer. Next slide. Of course, lots of references. I will say too, and I think this is on the resources sheet as well, Feeding Matters is a wonderful group and organization that has great resources for feeding for caregivers, but they also have a lot of training opportunities and webinars for clinicians as well.